Today, we have Julie Lamb with us as a guest, and we've invited her to talk to us about the legalities of coaching because, especially when we start a coaching business, a lot of coaches get a little bit tangled up on what should I be putting in place, what should I be considering, and very often it gets coaches stuck and not start a business because they're too worried about the legalities. So here, with Julie, today we will try to clear up some of the misunderstanding and help you understand how things can be done simply, or what are the things you don't need to worry too much about, and what are the things, the priorities that you should consider, but in fairly simple ways you can just tick those boxes and get your coaching business going. So without further ado, Julie, I would like to introduce Julie briefly and let her tell us more about her story. So Julie is a licensed therapist with over 20 years experience, so huge amount of expertise behind her. And now she also works as a business coach. And Julie, would you like to introduce yourself properly? Tell us a little bit more about you, and particularly why legalities, why this topic is important to you, why it's so relevant to you, what you learned and what you think would be very useful for our coaches in our group.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me too. So as Ann said, I have 20 years of experience as a therapist. And when I was working in a corporate job years ago, I actually worked with a lot of attorneys. And so attorneys became my friends, I guess you could say. And one of the biggest things as I worked during this time, I actually was called to be on stand to testify in a major trial and I was on stand for actually about 2 days of intense, we're going to call it interrogation of all things. And so when I was on stand, it really helped to solidify this idea of covering yourself. You know, CYA is what we call it in the business. And so as I went to start my business, that was the first thing I wanted to look at, is how do I make sure that I cover myself so that I am legally protected in all things. And so I reached out to my attorney friends to make sure that I was doing the things that I needed to. And so throughout this whole process, as I've built my business over the last 5+ years, I have honestly said, these are the things that I need, and these are the things that you don't need when you're starting a business. And so I kind of want to go over some of that as well, based upon that experience I had. So I'm excited to kind of walk through a lot of that with you. And so many of you are probably starting your business, or you might be a couple years into your business, or maybe you're even further along. So wherever you're at in your business, I want you to think, how do I apply this right now to me, to where I'm at? Don't look at it as, oh, I have to do all of these things. I want you to take a step back and say, where am I at right now in my business? How does this apply now? And what can I do right in this moment? So that's kind of my biggest thing to start with there. So let's dive in. And then if there's questions or anything like that, then I'll hopefully answer that as well. I wanted to start, obviously, because I am a therapist and a coach, I want to talk about the differences. And I want us to get really clear on boundaries with that. And so I'm going to talk about that and also bring in that legal aspect. So from that, I want to do it from the therapist perspective. So like I said, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm actually licensed in many states in the United States. So with clinical social work, I am bound by certain ethical standards that I must meet and reach in order to continue to practice. And that includes continuing education. It also includes making sure I'm up on different laws that are being passed and different things that might affect the therapy world. So coaching is obviously one of those things that often gets brought out. It's because how does somebody practice ethically and legally as a therapist and as a coach? So let me kind of back up and talk about, as a therapist, there are things that I'm allowed to do and things I'm not allowed to do. And then as a coach, it should be, I think for many of us, similar. There are things that we're allowed to do and things that we're not allowed to do. So one of the things that as a therapist, I can diagnose people. I can tell somebody if they have depression, anxiety, OCD, ADHD. I'm actually trained in how to diagnose those things. So when I say somebody has anxiety, from that perspective, it's coming as if I have diagnosed that person. But I want you to think about, as a coach, you're not trained, you're not able to actually diagnose somebody as ADD, anxiety, OCD. And so when you say you have anxiety, you're actually not completely ethical in that, because you're not actually allowed to diagnose somebody. So this is something very interesting as well, because in my marketing, if I say something to the effect of anxiety, or if I say depression, if I use those words, that actually is me as a therapist and can affect my license. So I want you to think, your coaches, you obviously can help people that are suffering, that are hurting in some aspect. But if you start saying, I can help you with your anxiety, that actually isn't very ethical. I can help you with your depression. That actually isn't very ethical, because those are therapy terms, and that is something that a therapist should be able to do. If you say instead, I can help somebody with overwhelm, I can help somebody with fears, I can help somebody with doubt, I can help somebody with sadness, those are coaching terms. Those are definitely different than those therapy words. And so that's the biggest thing I want to recognize, is what is a therapy word, and then what is also a coaching word. So those are some of the legal, and I'm going to call it also ethical. And I'm going to get on maybe my horse a little bit here, my soapbox. That's what it is, my soapbox. Trauma-informed coaching, I believe, is a myth. And the reason I'm going to just put that out there is because as a therapist, I am trained in trauma. I am trained in PTSD. I am trained in specifically looking at that. And many coaches out there are saying, I can help you with your trauma. And I want you to think, everything we talk about, is it harmful to the client? If I have a client come to me and they say, I'm dealing with trauma from abuse, from difficult relationships, whatever it may be, and you're saying, oh, I can help you, but you're actually not trained in any of those things, even if it's not therapy, if you're not trained in some sort of modality, some sort of coaching way of looking at that, you must be very, very careful. Will you cause harm to that client? Because as a therapist, I am bound by that, about not causing harm to a client. So everything that you do, my number one thing, am I causing harm to this client? Is it actually better for me to say, I can do this or I can't do this, rather than saying, I help everybody, I can do it all, and get yourself in trouble that way? So that's kind of I think one of the biggest things. I don't know if there's any questions about that or anything that we want to add to any of that.
I can't see any questions at the moment, but it's fairly, let me just spot it. It's quite tricky for especially new coaches to be able to determine, so it's a coach language versus a therapy language. Do you have any tips, any information on how to make it easy to assess? So what language should we be using? What sort of help is okay and not okay to offer, especially in our marketing and things like that? You know, there's a lot of things to consider. How can we make it simple and easy to understand?
Yeah. So the best way to make it simple and easy is to go to the symptoms. So rather than saying depression as, and I use depression a lot because it's kind of, I'm going to call it the buzzword. Basically, a lot of people will say, well, I help you with your depression. Depression is an overall category, but let's talk about symptoms. So let's talk about what are some symptoms of depression. We've got sadness. We have maybe some overwhelm. We've got not feeling like you fit in. We've got feeling like it's just heavy and there's just not enough. I'm a little burned out. Those are symptoms. When you talk about symptoms rather than a key phrase, that's the best thing you can do in your marketing. Another thing that you want to do is, and I see a question that comes up. Yeah. So if a client comes in and they says, well, I have depression and I have anxiety, I think it's 100% great to say, what does your depression look like? What does your anxiety look like? Like, tell me more, rather than just saying, oh, you're anxious, you're depressed. Oh, okay, I can help with that. No, what does your anxiety look like? What does your depression look like? And how does that stop you from achieving your goals? Therapists, we focus a lot on this is the diagnosis and this is your problem, and we help with that diagnosis. Whereas when it comes to specifically to coaching, we're goal oriented. We are looking at saying, here's the goal, here's where we want to go. So when you look at anything that has to do with that, you want to be really clear. How does this stop them from getting their goal? Not how does this stop them from living like their best life right in the moment, or how does this stop them from actually feeling better? But is this help in that aspect? I think I was like, I don't know if that answered that question or if there was a little bit more to that.
Yes, Julie's asking how to deal with it, because that's the language that the clients are using themselves. Yeah. So if you don't use those words, what do we do instead?
Okay, so if a client is using the words anxiety, or a client is using the words depression, it goes back to, again, tell me what does the anxiety look like? So in your marketing, one of the things I would really encourage you to do is say, what does anxiety look like for my clients? My clients come to me with anxiety. It looks like overwhelm. It looks like fear of the future. It looks like being afraid of what that might look like moving forward. And so using those words are very helpful for a client. Or if a client says something like, I go back to the anxiety too, because that is kind of, we call it this buzzword of effect. People like to say I'm very, I'm very anxious about something. And so I just want to always point out that it's always about the symptoms and not the overall reaching of what that looks like.
Jill, would you like to?
Sure. So my question is not specifically regarding marketing, but more in the context of my sessions. So I do a couple of things. One is that I work with people who eat emotionally, and I also work with physicians who are experiencing burnout and overwhelm. And it's often the same people. But I do tapping with them. I do a whole bunch of things. And one of the things that we do is we ask them, and this is typically stuff that many of us who trained in virtual coach were trained to do in working with Annie, but when we ask somebody to think of a certain thing and tell us what emotions they're feeling. And so, they might say sadness. They're not going to say depression in that context, but they're often going to say, I feel anxiety. When you think about pushing this food away and not eating it, or when you think about talking to your office manager about blah, 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 they say they feel anxious. And then I have exercises to help them go back to the origin of that feeling. But they are using that word, and I have to ask them to rate that level of that feeling and then before and after. And so I'm not really talking about it in terms of marketing, but it's a little tricky when the word anxiety is not just a diagnosis, it's also an emotion. And so when I'm using it in that context, what are your thoughts about that?
I think that that's actually an okay way to use it, because you are going more with the emotion, because anxious is an emotion. So this is where it gets this is the tricky part, because if you're saying, oh, it sounds like you have anxiety, that actually is a problem. But instead, if you're saying it sounds like you feel anxious, that's better. So if you see the difference is it sounds like you have anxiety, as opposed to it sounds like you feel anxious. So if you're leaning into feelings, the same thing. It's like, it sounds like you feel depressed. To me, depression's really, really tricky. I'm going to be really honest, because of such a diagnosable word. So instead, if somebody's like, I'm just feeling really down and discouraged, instead of saying it sounds like you're depressed, it sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed or sad, or help me feel if there's a better word for that. because depression actually isn't a feeling word. And so where anxiety, like you said, it is more of that feeling word.
Yeah, that helps. You know, and I want to be particularly careful about it because I am a physician, but I'm not a psychiatrist. And so I really want to stay away from that. And in my contract, it specifically says, coaching is not therapy. And if you need a therapist, you need a therapist. And, I'm very clear about that with people.
Yeah.
Okay.
But a lot of
Thank
people
you.
don't know. They'll be going along and they'll say, well, are you sure it's not therapy? How do you know the difference? And I think everybody has to get to the point where you know what your own difference is. So as a therapist, I can clearly say my difference is therapy deals with a diagnosis. It deals specifically with, in therapy, it's the diagnostic statistic manual. It's how I can diagnose somebody. We're looking at specific symptoms. We're looking at controlling those symptoms. We're looking at how that helps. Whereas coaching, I'm looking at a specific goal and then what stands in the way of reaching that goal. It feels very similar, but it all comes down to how intense am I going with the diagnosis of that. So as you guys are saying, what's therapy and what's coaching, I've heard terms like therapy is dealing with like a broken bone and coaching is dealing with the, like looking at it from how do I climb this mountain? I think that's fine, except to me, it sometimes paint therapist is a bad light. And I think that that's what we want to get away from. It's not coaching is better, therapy is better. They tackle different things. So if a client comes to you and they start talking about childhood trauma, by all means, I think it's appropriate to say, have you talked to a therapist about this? If it's things like, they're talking about how mom and dad put this belief in their head that they're not good enough, that's very different than mom and dad abused me. And I think that's where you want to make the distinction too, is how does that thought or that feeling stop them from going forward, rather than how does that thought or feeling or action actually impact them to doing the things that they want to do in their life. So that's kind of my biggest thing. You want to look at the differences there. But I also love one thing that was mentioned was in her specific contract. And I wanted to talk about contracts a little bit. My contract also does the same thing. It talks about how this is coaching. This is not therapy. As a business coach, I'm really looking at your business, what's stopping your business from moving forward. And yes, let's be honest, all of us, as we have businesses that are moving forward, we will all have life stuff coming up. We will all have feelings that come up. That's what I target a lot of my clients with, are their feelings of growth, of moving forward, and it feels uncomfortable, it feels hard, and then it triggers all sorts of things, all these thoughts that you didn't know that you had. So to me, business coaching brings up a lot of those therapy type things, but the difference is I don't sit in that. We don't diagnose. We don't say, oh, it sounds like, and as a therapist, if somebody comes to me for therapy, I can see them as a coach, but somebody comes to me as a coach and I cannot see them as a therapist. It's very clear and distinct in what I can and can't do. And you all have to be able to do that as well. So if somebody comes to see me for one aspect, just like we do with all our contracts, they come to see me for my 3-month contract, and then we re-sign and we work on something different. You don't say, oh, wait, by the way, we're changing our mind. We're now going to go and do something completely different. You stay true to what the goal was originally and moving forward from there. So that's what a contract does to protect you. It protects that aspect. How long am I working with somebody? What's the scope of my practice? And then what's the fee and also the refund policy? That's in your contracts as well. Mine's pretty lengthy. I did have an attorney look over it. It was something I received from somebody. And even though I put in my terminology, I do encourage everybody to look at getting an attorney to look over your own documents to make sure that they are compliant to your state, to your country, to where you're at, because I can only speak to, for instance, the state I'm in. I can't speak to every state. I can't speak to every country. And that's the biggest thing you want to look at is, are there terms in my contract that are specific to only this state, specific to only this country? And if they are, that's where an attorney can really come in to help you there. Okay.
Julie, we have a question from Arnie, who's asking whether we can simplify it as much as having a list of words that we shouldn't use, that we should avoid in our marketing or in any copy?
Yeah, so I have an emotion wheel, and in that emotion wheel, it has words that I'm going to say 100% are okay. So if there are words not on that wheel, like I'm going to say depression is not on that wheel, anxiety is not on the wheel, anxious is, then those are the words I can use. If it's on any sort of emotional wheel, you may use those words. If it comes to trauma, notice that word, trauma, PTSD, you've encountered the depression or OCD or ADHD, those are not, those are words that I would avoid because they're diagnoses. But again, all emotions, ADHD, think about the emotion behind it. It's like frustration, or it is feeling like you're always behind, or feeling like you're just all over the place. That is definitely, I would look at that as ADHD, I wouldn't say, but if you feel like, you're just not able to get things done in the way that you want to, you feel like you procrastinate, or you feel like you are not accomplishing things in a timely manner, those are the words I would definitely use. So that's the biggest difference. If I can't find it in the emotion wheel, then I don't use it in my marketing. And again, OCD is not in my marketing. Trauma and OCD are not on that emotion wheel. So I would be really careful when it comes to those aspects. Yeah, I was like, do we have other questions?
Yeah, that's great. It looks like Heidi's questions have also been answered. In the meantime, I wanted to touch on the point of a contract. So I see and also get questions from coaches very, very often about whether they should have a coaching agreement or coaching contract in place. I do have an agreement myself. It's more, I don't strictly give it to clients, but I do offer it to them. So if they want an agreement, then I've got everything in writing. It's more about just being clear and managing expectations and things like that. And also just to confirm it to them that there is a rebate clause and things like that. But most often they don't really ask. But coaches, so what is your view about coaching agreements and contracts, if whatever you call it? Whether it's a good idea to have it, whether you're using it yourself, you mentioned it briefly earlier. What's your view on it?
So I believe contracts are really good to have. And part of the reason comes from, I'm going to call it the therapy model, where we use what's called like consent to treat. If you go to any doctor's office, you're going to have their forms that say you consent to this treatment. And then what happens if like you're not happy with them? I think coaching is the same, where we want to be able to say, you're investing in me. And because you're investing, you're expecting certain things, and this is how I'm going to deliver them. So my coaching agreement states, it has a lot of other, like a lot of other paragraphs we're going to call, but the basic thing it says is that client A is engaging with my company for the purpose of coaching. And we are doing it for 6 months for one-on-one coaching. If that, that's the way my program looks, one-on-one coaching, 6 months. And we meet over Zoom, and it is this amount of money. And then I have, it's pay in full this amount, and then it's a payment plan in this amount. And when you put it out that way, it's very clear for the client to see this is what is expected. Then it also comes back and says, this is what I'm going to do in return. So like a client signs up with me, they know that they're going to get a workbook that's going to start off their journey. They also know that they get these calls with me. They know that they get support and whatever that may look like. And so when a client knows those things, it helps them to build and continue to build trust with you. The other thing is it also protects you when it comes to refunds. So I don't offer refunds because the nature of what we do is that you come and you work with me and you may get a lot of information. And then if you were to say, oh, I got my information, I'm going to go. I want my clients to understand you're investing in this whole process. And when you invest in this whole process, this is what this looks like. But I have had somebody ask, well, Julie, I've invested all this money with you. What happens if you get sick? Or what happens if, like you die, or, all of that. And that's actually all in my contract. It all talks about if I am unable to perform that, then they get like a partial refund, or, that's something we can talk about. it protects the client as well. Notice I go back to that beginning part. What is in the best interest of the client? And when I go from that perspective, in my opinion, a contract is in the best interest of a client, because then they know what to expect and what not to expect as well.
Very, what's the word I'm looking for? So the rebate and refund clauses are very much disputed in many different ways. A lot of the gurus out there seems to strongly believe that it is a good practice to offer a rebate, because it shows the confidence in their own ability, as well as it gives confidence to the client that there's nothing to lose. But obviously there might be some conditions around that, or if you put in place the things that we, explore, and the ideas that, like action ideas you put in place and whatever, if you put all that in place and you still don't succeed, then we'll give you a refund. And I do offer a refund myself. I normally link it to a number of sessions. So if you don't see that, my style works for you, or how we work and what kind of work we're doing, and you don't like it, you feel uncomfortable and that sort of stuff, then feel free to let me know, and then I'll give you the money back. But I think it's very much down to the coach, what they feel is appropriate, what gives them the confidence, what gives the clients the confidence, and doesn't leave them to risk. Because I think as a coach, if you do a great job and you really, really powerfully help the clients, then there's no real risk in offering a refund to them. Because if they ask for a refund, it says that for some reason it's not working for them. They don't appreciate it. It's not making enough difference. Because once it starts making a difference and you start really helping them to feel better, to feel more confident, to take the steps in the business or whatever it might be, then it's not very often that they ask for money back. So quite controversial topic, and very differing thoughts and opinion on that.
Yeah, and I do think if you do offer a refund, by all means, like you said, it is up to the coach what they do. But if you do offer a refund, you want to make sure that you have specific things that have to be met for that. So like you may be like if you have a coaching program or like a course, and somebody is in the course and you say you have a refund, I think it's 100% fair to say, you have to show up to so many calls, you have to do this. And then, if this isn't working, this isn't the right thing, then, this is what my refund policy looks like. I think either way, whatever it is, whether you say I don't have a refund or whether I do have a refund, I think your reasons for it need to be written out in a very clear way that helps you to understand why you do it, and also why for your client. So I will admit that once you get a client that if they feel like, this isn't working for me, I think that that's a fair thing to then ask and be willing to be coachable to them, to say, can you tell me why? Can you tell me what's going on? Rarely when you actually are in the service of a client will they ask for a refund if you are truly, I think, open to that, open to being able to say what's going on. But you know what? That's why we have contracts. That's why we have that, so that if there is a concern, this is what my refund policy does look like. And if they do want to do that they can. My contract is one of the things that's very interesting in it is it does talk about like intellectual property, and it talks about like if you use my information, then you want to be able to say what they can and can't do with it. Because there are many people out there that will come and they will take, for instance, something I've done, and then they will try to put it off as their own. And you know what, let's be honest here, that's everywhere. We can all put something out there. We're going to call it our freebie or a lead magnet, whatever you want to call it. And somebody's going to come out and they might use something that's similar, or they might, I have seen people copy and paste exactly what you're putting out there. And that's where, like in my contract, it's to protect me from that. So if a client, but this is the different, if a client puts it out there and they copy, then I can go after the client to say, you're actually using my information without permission. So what we want to do as the business side is if there are things that we want to protect, to copyright, that this is where we say, do I have a copyright attorney? just like I said, you can't say depression or OCD or ADHD as a diagnostic tool. If you were to go and Google like a brand name and you found that everybody else happened to, or there was somebody else that happened to have this exact same name as you, that person could come after you saying that you're using their words. So you have to be, that's the only thing I would encourage you to do is if you're saying, oh, I really want to use this particular language, you just want to check, is this something that's is it used frequently? Is it something that other people have already copyrighted? I have a friend who has copyrighted her whole program, and she has enough evidence to show that she's done that. So then she could go after somebody that had tried to use the exact same words as her, like the exact same coaching name and group and everything as she had. So as you start to develop this intellectual property, you want to be you want to be able to share it, but you also want to feel like you're protective of it. And part of protecting it could be getting it copyrighted or could get it intellectually protected in that manner. So that's kind of a different aspect of the contract, especially if you're running courses or groups that may have some of those things in there as well. And it was like, I don't know if we have any other questions about that.
Yes, there are questions coming. Just to go, well, stay with this topic for a moment. Obviously, we're talking about a number of different things that could be going into an agreement or contract. So again, we want to avoid getting too confusing and too complicated. So do you have any resources you can share with our members how we can find some simple templates to start with so they don't get too bogged down and too worried about not moving forward because they haven't got an agreement in place? Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, so there is a lawyer that I've gone and looked at a lot of her templates and have used actually a few of them. There's two of them that you can look at. One of them, her name is Valerie Del Grosso, Grosso, and she has legal aspects for coaches. But the thing that's interesting is that you could probably go on Facebook. You could go on Google and you can find contracts all over the place. Honestly, you could go, if you just Google search and said coaching contract, you will pull up some samples. And so what you want to do, you can go and do that and fill it out and look at it and say what actually applies to me, what doesn't. So if there's something like about a course program, but you don't offer a course, you can choose to take that out. If you want just the basic of this is how much I charge, this is what this payment plan looks like, and this is what I offer, this is what this looks like, then you can take that and just put it together. Then what you just want to make it like as simple as possible. And then you can take that to an attorney to say, hey, does this meet the requirements of my specific state, my specific country? One of the things that's very interesting from my time when I was on the stand was my notes were brought up. How I did everything was brought up so that they could look at it. And the attorney, like my attorney, was actually she loved the fact that my notes made them have to interpret. It was a little bit open-ended. It wasn't real clear on some things. Contracts, on the other hand, we want to be real clear on many areas. And then the areas that are more open to interpretation are the areas that are okay basically to be open. For instance, the payment plan, what I give you, what's at my sole discretion, what your responsibilities are, those are a little bit more fluid and open. But things like my refund policy or my like what happens if I don't, if this there's fancy lawyer words like servability, if it can't be served, if it has to be discontinued, what that looks like. Those are more the legal have to have, and some of the other stuff is very fluid. So you want some of the fluid, some of that, but yes, you can Google anything and find any contract for free right now. It's the same thing like as you're putting a website together. You'll notice every website at the bottom has terms of service and privacy policy. And you want to go, let's say that you're a coach that works with let's say moms, and you happen to know that you have a competitor that has something similar. You can pull up their privacy policy and their terms of condition. You can take a look at them and see what those look like. Some of them apply to you, some of they don't, but honestly, terms of conditions and privacy policies are the same on every website. So you want to just find the things that maybe look like yours and you go from there. Now, there's some people that may say that's not actually a good idea. You know, you should actually go and get your own and make sure. But if we're starting out, to be real honest, these all look the same. Terms of condition, privacy policy, they all look the same. And you want to make sure that you have those, especially, I know that this is a term that we'll talk about, is the GDPR. And that is the GDPR is essentially the standard, the European standard that says this is how you can like get information, this is how you can. And that's where those terms of service and privacy policy come into effect. It's a way to help protect the consumer as they're giving information and as they are giving email addresses and what's done with that. So that's kind of that dual protection that comes into place there.
Great. Just for those who don't know what GDPR is a data protection act that was introduced about 5 years ago in Europe. So that says that we can only hold information that we have legitimate reason to hold, and anything else we have to delete. And we also have to make sure that we keep those data very, very safe and cannot be breached and cannot be accessed by anyone else who doesn't need the data. Just wanted to go back to the contract bit that you mentioned, that it's a good idea to get it checked by an attorney. I haven't had mine checked, but I worked in HR, so I'm fairly okay with it. Again, a lot of the things, like Jill mentioned here, that she's got an agreement as well, and she did what you just suggested, is to go online and read a number of different templates and picked out the bits that were relevant to her, and I did the same. And what I also did with mine is just change the language a bit, because part of my brand is being an approachable, relaxed, friendly, encouraging coach. So I changed the language so it's not so legal, it's not so strict, dry legal language, but it's a bit more approachable. So I use my own words. I've just rewritten some of the things that I picked up here and there. And I added a couple of extra clauses that I normally offer as part of my own coaching, just to make it my own, if that makes sense. I think that can also be quite important when you give this agreement to a client. You don't want it to sound very different to how you are and how you are going to be, how your relationship is going to be with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that there's two trains of thought with that. And one is, it is still a legal agreement. And so sometimes there are legal phrases that need to be a part of it. And so I think that there's I think it's fair that there's a lot of things that we want to be open with. But if there's something that this is my thing, if I'm in doubt and I'm not sure if this is what needs to happen, it never hurts to get a second opinion. It never hurt. Like when I started my business, I have an attorney that started up all of the paperwork for that. And I know a lot of people, for instance, in the US use LegalZoom. And because of the nature of when I started my private practice first, I needed to make sure I was protected there. So when in doubt, always make sure that you just check and say, is this something that I need to get another opinion on? I think that's very crucial. If you feel like it's good, this is the other thing. If you feel good, I want you to empower yourself to move with that. We always plan for the worst case scenario and then we hope for the best. And I always feel like sometimes we assume that things are going to be, sometimes you plan for or you assume things will be bad already. And then you plan for all those best case scenarios. Whichever direction you want to look, you always want to just say, this is my business. I'm in charge of my business and I can do my business the way that I want to and resonates with me. And I don't need to get hung up on, do I have all of those things, here, there. One of the things I joke about is I actually created 6 figures without an email list. So that was before, a lot of people say, well, how do you do that? And so the GDPR wasn't on my radar because I didn't have the email list. I didn't have this extensive website that was, you know, it was just basic, because all I was doing is making connections with people, talking to people. And as I work with them, then that's what helps to move your business forward. So if you just think, if anything comes from this, the main things I want you to always consider: what is in my client's best interest? And then the other thing is, what feels right to me right now to move forward? And if I need more information, there's plenty of information out there, but sometimes also having somebody that can say, yes, this is the information you need to know where that person can be and then be willing to go to them, for instance, the attorney. So I think there was
yes,
another
thanks,
question.
Julie. Yeah, Heidi's got a burning question, it sounds like. Heidi, would you like to come off mute and ask it?
Sure. Thank you for your presentation today. It's very good information. I was just wondering, for people who have certifications, degrees in other areas, health professional, as well as being a coach, I've been looking for professional liability malpractice insurance to specifically cover virtual coaching globally. I'm finding that most insurance companies do the virtual, but they only do it on a domestic level. They will not cover it outside of the states where I live. And I'm working with people all over the world, you know, in England and various places. And so I'm looking for a company that covers that, but I also want to hear your feedback on malpractice and liability insurance for that specific purpose, and what resources you may know about that we can click into.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I feel malpractice insurance is really recommended, because to me, it is pennies on the protection. It's the same thing with any insurance. I have insurance for my private practice, and then I have insurance on my coaching practice. I think that's very, I think it's very important. With that said, if you have a contract in place, that often can help you. And the point of insurance is to help with legal fees. If you were to be sued, breaking this down even further, if you have an LLC that protects you as the company, if a client was to sue you, that's why we have insurance. If a client was to sue you, they would sue the company, the LLC, and there's a natural barrier between you personally and this company. If they were to sue you saying that you perform malpractice, then that's where this insurance would help cover some of that as well. So insurance it's tricky in a lot of ways. Where I have a physical office, my insurance does cover, like if something happened in my physical office, if a client tripped, if a client hurt themselves. But on virtually, a client's not going to trip and get in trouble with me. It's, you know, we're virtual here. So from that perspective, insurance is more just, am I acting at my best capacity and at my best care for that client? That's where that comes from. I really like CPH. I don't know if anybody else has any experience, but CPH liability is a really great company that's where I have my insurance through. I found that they do work with that global aspect. They also work with, like, again, they have my therapy and then my coaching as well. So it's the dual there. So I don't know if you've looked at them.
Yeah, I've had CPH in the past. I have to call them because a couple of the companies that I spoke with specifically said, no, we will not cover global. So that's definitely an issue. But, you know, in asking this question, it's because I have this other practice that I do. But do you recommend coaches also have insurance in this realm, or just people who have other degrees or certifications or licensure?
You know, I know it's a tricky thing because people will say, well, no, you don't. I look at it and say it actually is really cheap. And
it is cheap.
Honestly, the liability, let's be real here. The US is sometimes a trigger happy, sue people happy place. There's a lot more litigation that happens here than in other countries. And I think that is a lot of times why like these companies are US based. And so that's why they're not considered global, because they're more looking at who's actually going to sue. And this is just my experience has been in the past that we as Americans are a little bit more, how's a polite way to say this? We're a little bit more cautious about some of those things. And sometimes we're also a little bit more like hot-headed about things. That's why coaching is so fantastic when you're working with high caliber people that are ready to stop that. And so that's my political way, I suppose, of saying some of that too. But I think, I think it all goes back to what's in the best practice, like, and trust yourself there. So if you have a practice and you're able to document what I do, what that looks like, and you work with mostly like people outside of the United States, then you just have to start asking sometimes what's the risk and what's the liability. And I think honestly, it's interesting. I think these company also considers Canada part of that. And so I don't think you'd have a problem with that. I think it's just when you start getting to the European nations, they have some of their own laws and their own procedures. And so you just want to maybe ask like why they wouldn't, or if they have a company that they would recommend to. But as far as everything else, insurance is really not very expensive. So I do recommend that. I think there was another question about like along those lines. No, I think that was it, just about the insurance. So I don't know if there was any other question about insurance there.
Jill, did you have any other questions about insurance, or was it covered what you wanted
I
to?
was looking for names of good companies to call because I didn't really know where to begin. So are you saying that we need to have both business insurance and malpractice insurance, or is it all the same thing?
It's all the same.
So one policy. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. They'll try to tell you, because the insurance companies do this, they'll try to tell you, no, you need this. But if you're working virtually, then it's more for that malpractice, for that, because when they do, they're suing you. If you do get to be these big corporations, big companies, that's something different you may want to consider at that point. But when we're like starting out, when it's just solo, like it's us, then the malpractice insurance covers it all, covers the business you and all that kind
So
of stuff.
what do I specifically say when I call, like I look up this company, I Google CPH liability and I call them. What do I say to them about what I'm looking for?
You say it actually, the forms that you fill out, they guide you through exactly what you need. Like when it talks about business, they're talking about the physical location rather than like your business as a whole. And so as you go to fill out the forms, the things you're going to specifically ask about or talk about are things like how many clients you see, where do your clients see, how do you meet these, or how do you interact with your clients? Do you have a contract in place? They do ask that. Do you have standards of practices? Are you certified in any coaching methodology? So they ask some of those questions. And just so you're aware, like we all know you don't have to be certified to be a coach. That's there are no certifications, globally as far as that's concerned. So when they're asking that, they're just asking more from the standpoint of what does your business look like, and are you just some person that came out and said, I'm a coach one day, or do you actually have some trainings and some knowledge to help back that up, some scientific basing behind it? And that's what they really want to know.
I have one more question related to, oh, sorry, were you done, Jill?
Yeah, I just said, okay.
Okay. One more question related to this insurance. I know there's a rider on, because I've gone through the applications that you're talking about, and there's a section that says, if you are educating, it's kind of like if you're doing lives, if you're doing conferences or presenting or podcasts or whatever, that's an extra additional layer of coverage because you're putting your stuff out there as an expert and an authority. Do you recommend getting that rider as well on there?
I think it depends on how much you do that. I always like to put, for instance, whenever I do lives, like disclaimers, this is just Julie speaking, not therapist Julie. Like that is one way to protect it. But you can, if you're constantly speaking, if you're doing retreats, you're doing Facebook Lives, you're doing a lot of interaction with people in that perspective, you have groups, then I don't think it's a bad idea to consider that. One of the things that's very interesting, these writers, you may put that in there, and then the writers look back on it and they take some time to think about it and to think about, well, does this actually apply? Does this really work? And so just because it takes a while, don't think that means that they're going to say no or they're going to charge you more. It's sometimes just more gathering of information. So for instance, mine, it took a little bit longer because one aspect of my business that I did was it's a lot more legal and technical. And so they just needed to make sure they got some information that I was licensed to do that particular like mediation, like that was okay to do. And so once they have that information, again, that's more my private practice, then it was easier for them to prove it. They didn't raise my rates. They just need to have that information in there. So if you're doing a lot of that, just put it in there and then kind of see what they come back with as well. So we've covered so many things. So I don't know if there's anything that we've left out or forgotten or anything that people want to know.
I had one more question. You briefly mentioned intellectual right earlier, and you mentioned how to avoid breaching others' rights. So at which point would you recommend to a coach to start considering to set up their own, how to protect their products, their content, their whatever? At which point should they put things in place and not to worry until? So what's the point and how to do it when you get there?
So when you start on the point where you're developing a lot of intellectual property and you notice that you're creating a lot of new ideas, that's the time that you want to say, how can I copyright this? Now I'm going to there's a really funny example in the writing world. There was a particular author that tried to copyright a word. And it's a very common word. It's a word that people use a lot of. And she was like, no, this is my brand. I want this word to be copyrighted. And there was authors everywhere that was like, how can you copyright this word? And so it was actually shot down. I think she couldn't prove enough that this was a very unique word. And so then, because she tried to send cease and desist letters to people to stop using this particular word. And I think the thing that's very interesting about this is as you start going, if you start teaching, for instance, a particular, I would have to tell you the word, it's a dirty word. So she tried to get this dirty word basically copyrighted, which I thought was really funny. So this is the same idea where sometimes when we are talking about coaching, if I start saying, business coaching, and I try to say, I'm going to copyright that, you can't. Business coaching is like, it's been around forever. You can't copyright that. But if you were to say, I use the specific subconscious belief, like the specific tool, and the name of my program is the specific tool, and it's a new thing that hasn't come out before, then I would for sure start that process. You can reach out. There are specific copyright attorneys. I know that my friend uses one in California. That's all they do is you can copyright attorneys, and they'll be able to tell you, okay, this word actually is, or this phrase is actually something that you can copyright. It's the idea if I say, beliefs impact our feelings, and then I try to copyright that, that's a therapy thing that's gone back years and years, and it's something I can't copyright. So if you're noticing that you're creating new things, nobody's saying those things, and you want to create a name of a program, that's kind of the biggest thing, a name of a program. So if you're saying that I'm the fearless, I'll use my friend's example, fearless soulpreneur. She has that copyrighted because she's, it's very on brand to her. So if you're saying that these are the things that I am specifically, like this is my brand, my name, and this is what I want copyrighted, then you can always do that. If it's right now when you're starting, I wouldn't worry too much about that unless you notice that you're creating a specific course, a specific program, a specific name. But I would really just start to say, just do your work, right? Just go out there, do things. Don't worry about it unless you know that you're creating, mostly it's for the program in itself or a course that you want to start copywriting those things. So.
And where can we check whether those names were, those titles have been copyrighted before and we shouldn't use? Do you have simple tips for that?
Google's a great resource. So we never want to underestimate it. If you just go to Google and you go copyright and then you type a word, it will pull up if it's copyrighted. They also have like specific websites that you can just put like copyrighted and then it will pull it up. But yeah, so I would start there, start Googling. We all see it where they've got like the trademark signal or it's not signal sign, the trademark sign. Then you know that you don't want to use those words in anything that you're doing. So that's for sure. Another way is if you see that trademark signal or sign, or if you copyright and type in a word. So as an example, I wanted to name my like a program I did. I was going to call it the Break Free Academy. And I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but there's a really big company out there called Break Free. And so that was something I was like, oh, I can't use that because it is trademarked at that time. And yes, Break Free, we could say is like an everyday word, but it was because it had like the academy or something to that effect that I couldn't, it wouldn't be, they could come after me and say, don't use this word. So yeah. So like, that's part of it. Lots of things we talk about is like, are there other questions, other things we want to look at?
Yes, I just need to unmute myself. Yes, we covered loads of things already and we're coming to the top of the hour. So I have a last question. If any of the audience who's with us in Zoom, if you have any other questions, stay with us after I stopped the recording, the live stream. I have one more question, or actually two more questions for you. One is, obviously today we were here to clarify things, to make the legal side of things sound less scary. Do you have any golden nuggets, any last advice to share with the coaches when it comes to legal aspects? And the second questions will be, how can people get in touch with you?
Okay. So to answer the first one, when it comes to anything legal, don't let it scare you. That's my biggest advice to anybody that's starting a business, moving your business forward, is don't let it stop you or scare you. If you are truly going from the idea that I am out to help people, I'm not out to harm people, you want to start with that, stay right in that sphere. And then all you want to do is look at, how do I protect that person as well as how do I protect myself? When you have that frame of reference, then honestly, that's the best thing you can do. I highly recommend that when you're at the point that you're ready to get an attorney, make sure you have one that you trust. You can also just, use use your own, make sure it's fine. You don't have to get an attorney. Like everybody says, oh, you have to. You don't have to. As long as you feel like you are serving the client's best interest and your best interest at the same time, then that's the best protection you can have. One aspect of that, when we're setting boundaries in our business, we want to make sure that we're setting both physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, and then like relationship boundaries. So if you think about, would I do this with everybody? That's a really good standard of practice. So with my clients, would I do the same treatment to everybody? And if I would, that's a really good standard. If I'm like, no, I'd only do this with certain clients, that's not a standard you want to consider. So I highly recommend thinking about your own boundaries. Is, if I could do this to everybody, would I do it for everybody? And if so, that's the best way to protect yourself in that manner. So the other thing is that if you are looking for any information, you can find me at Julie Lamb Coaching. I have my Facebook page is that, and then a website, Julie Lamb Coaching. And you can get any information there about me that you want. Also, I do have a PDF that's getting posted there. It's about imposter syndrome. A lot of times we feel like we are imposters in our own business. And if you're like that PDF, you can download that. if you are interested, I do have another one that's like 3 things to consider when you're building your business. You can email me at julie@julielambcoaching.com and say, Julie, I want that PDF you talked about, and I can get that to you as well. So that's a couple of ways that you can reach me. Again, it's just Julie Lamb Coaching, and that's who I am. So thank you for letting me be here today.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm going to stop live streaming now. Thank you everyone who was following us on Facebook. Hope to see you at our next live cast session very soon.